the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping saga. It sounds like another joke. I mean, tell us about the latest on that.
Yeah, this is crazy. My colleague Tom Knight actually wrote that story. But there's been basically the plot to uncover a trial to uncover the kidnapping plot of Gretchen Whitmer. But as we get closer to this trial date arriving, it looks more and more like the FBI was not only involved in surveilling some of these individuals, but may have actually been leading the way, may have actually been putting, thoughts into the minds of some of these individuals who are now charged with plotting to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, that they were actually sort of spearheading this effort. And so the attorneys for some of these guys have raised entrapment, basically saying we wouldn't have done any of this stuff if the FBI agents hadn't pushed us to do this sort of thing. Because I think that if this does end up going before a jury, there's a better than zero chance that this ends in a mistrial or possibly even an acquittal.
And wouldn't it be fun to see Michigan State troopers arresting FBI agents?
The emblem of the brave and true, the flag. Out of the banner so high, every heart will sing the part as all across the land we raise our voices far and near.
Bill McIntosh Show, Freedom First Network, on with Cam Edwards. He's the editor of BearingArms.com. As you can see, he's also a spokesman for the Second Amendment Foundation. He has a lot to say. He's a very prolific writer. His intro is one that some of you have heard but don't know all about. He used to work with the NRA radio show. He's from Oklahoma City. Now he lives in Virginia on a farm with his family. When he was in Oklahoma City, he worked morning drive time radio. His mother was a Kennedy Democrat. He grew up in a gun-free household. When he became a husband, he started to realize, hey, having a gun is maybe like necessary to defend my family. He now has somewhere around 40 guns at home, just in case. He's now going to talk with us about this new laws in Texas, laws in Texas. Texas is now a very, very big sanctuary state. What's your reaction to that, Cam? That's not the first case of a state declaring itself like that, or is it?
No, it's not the first state, but this really is the first year that we've seen states adopt Second Amendment sanctuary legislation, and Texas definitely in the foreground of that effort. So, there were some states like Tennessee, Oklahoma that maybe did it, a couple of months before Texas did, but this has really been the year of the Second Amendment sanctuary, and I'm glad to see it. Each state sort of has its own little twist on the law, but the basic idea is to tell the federal government, in this case, particularly the Biden administration, that look, if you pass any new gun control laws, whether it's through executive order, whether you're able to get anything through Congress, which seems unlikely, you're going to be on your own in terms of enforcing those laws because we're not going to lift a finger to help. So it's the Second Amendment equivalent of California, for instance, with their sanctuary law telling ICE, we're not going to enforce federal immigration law. These are states saying the same thing when it comes to federal gun control laws. And I think it's a good step.
It's a very good step, but I think it's on a much higher plane because California has no basis to say that. That's a de facto defiance against the Constitution. Whereas in this case, it's the federal government that's in de facto defiance of the Constitution. And Texas is saying, hey, wait a second. Here in our state, we follow the U.S. Constitution, although you, federal authorities, may not. And I think it's perfect. Yeah.
I will say that, the courts have stepped in. There was a case back in the 1990s called Prince versus the United States. There was also dealing with a gun issue. At the time, it was the Brady Act, the National Instant Background Check System. And while the federal government was putting that in place, the federal government told county sheriffs around the country, hey, you need to be the ones doing these background checks until we've got our system up and running. Sheriff Jay Prince up in Montana sued and said, no, it's not my job. That's your job. If you want these background checks done, do them yourself. This case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said in Prince versus U.S. that the federal government cannot compel state or local law enforcement to enforce federal law. You can't get in the way of federal agents enforcing federal law, but you don't have to help. And so that opened the door to things like Texas' new Second Amendment sanctuary law, but it also did open the door to California's sanctuary law when it comes to, illegal immigration. Basically, it's a 10th Amendment argument, right? If the Constitution does not specifically state that states have to go along and enforce these federal restrictions, then these states have the ability to opt out. And that's what we're seeing here. And I think we're going to see more states do the same when it comes to a right to keep and bear arms. I think this is really the tip of the spear in terms of the Second Amendment sanctuary movement.
Right. So then there's also something about this, in that one of the laws that came through in Texas was a law that bans government contracts with companies that, quote, discriminate against the firearm or ammunition industries. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
They're getting a lot of abuse. And that's a good thing.
They have been, but you're right. I mean, this is big because this goes back to the Obama administration. The Obama administration tried to put a policy in place called Operation Choke Point. And basically, they bullied big banks into not doing business with disfavored industries, whether it was the firearms industry, payday loans, pawn shops, things of that nature. Anything that the federal government didn't like, they said, listen, if you continue to do business with these entities, well, we're going to view that as increasing your risk. And so it's going to make it more likely that we're going to come in and audit your books. We're going to make life miserable for you. And so a lot of banks said, all right, well, we're not going to do business with these industries then. And you've had other banks like Bank of America, Citibank, that have sort of taken the same thing, right? They want to impose corporate gun control policies. And so they say, well, we're not going to do business with anybody in the firearms industry unless they adopt these quote unquote best practices, unless they, refuse to sell AR-15s to civilians or refuse to produce, quote unquote high capacity magazines. And so what Texas has done is basically fire back and say, all right, look, if you guys want to have those policies in place, cool, that's up to you. But in doing so, you are now going to preclude yourself from operating in our municipal bond market. And Texas has the second biggest municipal bond market in the country behind California. So this is going to hit those banks in their bottom line, right? And say, if you want to keep up these corporate gun control policies, cool, but you're going to do so. You're basically putting, your corporate wokeness ahead of the bottom line. And let's see how your investors and let's see how your stockholders respond to that.
That's good. I love discussing this from the Texans, and other people are going to follow suit. It's a big state. It has a really, really big splash whenever it does something. And that's good news for everybody who believes in the Second Amendment and in bearing arms. One of the other laws that they signed into effect apparently was that one that effectively designates gun stores as essential businesses. I mean, hey, remember when marijuana was deemed an essential business during the COVID? I mean, last year, the start of the COVID-19 lockdowns. Oh, that was one that you can close. You can close a church, right? But heaven forbid you should shut down a pot dispensary or liquor store. That's off limits, right? So then now they're saying, well, guess what? During times of emergency, you better believe a gun store is necessary to defend oneself, right? So it's another positive thing. I'm glad they've done that. What's your view? Is that another piece of legislation that we can see emulated in other states, Cam?
I think it is. Although, honestly, we've already seen one round of this back in 2005, 2006, after Hurricane Katrina. And we had gun confiscations in New Orleans. There were a number of states that passed emergency powers laws that basically limit the power of the governor to try to shut down gun stores or to try to impose any restrictions on people's ability to own or carry firearms in a state of emergency. In fact, in Virginia, where I live, our Democrat governor, Ralph Northam, voted for that very same law when he was in the state legislature. And that came in handy because he tried to shut down gun stores. He actually went after gun ranges last year in the first shutdown. We took him to court and we won because we had that law already in place. So I think we are going to see more states move in that direction, at least if they've got the legislative numbers to do so. Obviously, if you've got an anti-gun state legislature, they're not going to do anything like that. They're going to make it as easy as possible for your rights to be deprived in a state of emergency when you need those rights the most.
Right. Okay. But I want to get your views on a couple of things. Do you think now that Texas has the least restrictive gun laws now in the nation,
Mhm.
would you say?
Boy, I mean, if they don't have the least restrictive, they're certainly up there. I mean, they're in the top tier, right? Because you can look at other states like Wyoming, Montana. Texas is the 22nd state to adopt constitutional carry. So, they're not really leading the way, but because, as you mentioned, Texas is such a big state, it's such a population rich state, people are now sitting up and taking notice. And I think that, constitutional carry does put Texas in that top tier of states that recognize the right to keep and bear arms. They don't put limitations or artificial barriers between you and your rights. And I think that as a result, I expect constitutional carry to get a big boost in next year's legislative sessions around the country. We had about half a dozen states adopt constitutional carry this year. I would not be shocked to see 6 more adopt constitutional carry in 2022.
Right. Okay. We do want to ask you also about news concerning efforts by the anti-gun lobby, not just in the United States, but also at world at large, to try to force into the United States gun registration related practices. I don't know, how can you call them laws because it's coming from the UN regarding the gun registration. Is it time to call your senator, do you think, or what, about this? Because they want to force it on us.
Right. Yeah. So this is interesting. I mean, this arms trade treaty at the UN has been around for over a decade now. And every time there's a Democrat in office, they say, well, we're gonna sign this treaty. We're gonna be a part of this treaty. But the numbers aren't there to ratify this treaty in the Senate, right? I mean, Biden can't get 52 votes for most of his legislative agenda items. So the idea that you're going to get 66 votes to sign on to this UN arms trade treaty, I don't see it happening. But I do see the administration signing it. And what's important with that bill is that the United Nations, once we've signed a treaty, they view us as being a part of that treaty, even if we haven't ratified it. They don't care what our Constitution says. They care about that name being put down on paper, right? So as soon as Biden were to ratify the arms trade or sign the arms trade treaty, the UN is going to try to hold us as a party to that. And that could mean, I think, difficulties for the firearms industry here at home, more so than individual gun owners. I think this is a way to go after the firearms industry. And we've certainly seen that with like the government of Mexico, for instance, suing gun manufacturers, trying to blame them for cartel violence, right? That happened within the past month or so. So this is another part of that global anti-gun agenda. I don't think it's a bad idea for gun owners to contact their senators, but I also don't see the Biden administration actually introducing an arms trade treaty into the Senate because I think they know that it's going nowhere. So I think the Biden administration will probably, sign on, but I don't think they're going to even attempt to try to get that treaty ratified.
Right. I mean, what should be done, I think, is people have got to let their own political leaders and representatives know, but especially people in the Democrat Party, that we're disgusted with this constant drumbeat against the Second Amendment. And you got to knock it off. The Democrat Party has got to knock it off. A couple of stories. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I agree with you, but for the Democrats, unfortunately, most of them are still of the mindset that their base demands more restrictions on our right to keep and bear arms, even as we've seen a growing number of Democrats actually become gun owners over the past year and a half. You're right. I think not only are they making a constitutional mistake, I think they're making a political mistake in pushing gun control as hard as they are. But you're right. It's up to us to stand up and push back.
Right. Now, you've got some interesting news on bearingarms.com, of which you're the editor. Tell us about the new Colorado gun law for gun control.
Yeah, this is, I got to say, this is just silly. And it's one of those things, I call it a soundbite solution because it sounds good when a politician says it, as long as you don't think too much about it. So in Colorado, as of this week now, if you discover that your firearm has been stolen from you, you are required to report that to the police. If you don't report that to the police, it's a $25 fine. Now, Bill, I don't know about you, but anytime that I'm the victim of a burglary, the police are going to be my first phone call, followed by my insurance company, right? And I think that's the case for the vast majority of gun owners. But violent crime is rising in Denver. In fact, it's been climbing for about 7 years straight in the state of Colorado. and the politicians in charge there, they have to quote do something, right, to show the public that they're serious about this. And rather than going after violent criminals themselves, rather than increasing the police budget so we can maybe up our clearance rate for homicides, put more bad guys behind bars, they're aiming at legal gun owners and trying to say that they're the problem, that gun owners are getting firearms stolen. They're not telling the police about it. Criminals are going on to commit huge amounts of violent crimes with these stolen firearms, and that all that could be stopped if we just have this law that fines people $25 if they don't report their lost or stolen firearms to police. I think it's absurd. It's silly. It is. It's a joke. And I honestly, I mean, I feel bad for Colorado residents who didn't vote for this stuff because there are a lot of them who didn't vote this way. But the Democrats that are in charge of the state of Colorado, I mean, look, they very clearly see legal gun owners as a bigger problem than violent criminals. And until that changes, I don't see anything getting better in Colorado, not in terms of the gun laws or the violent crime rate.
They can invoke that. Look what I did. I backed this law.
Right. Yeah, I did something.
I did something against crime, right? Please.
Yeah, it's not something that works.
Good. So what's the latest on, I see you covered at bearingarms.com, the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping saga. It sounds like another joke. I mean, tell us about the latest on that.
Yeah, this is crazy. My colleague Tom Knight actually wrote that story. But there's been this the plot to uncover a trial to uncover the kidnapping plot of Gretchen Whitmer. But as we get closer to this trial date arriving, it looks more and more like the FBI was not only involved in surveilling some of these individuals, but may have actually been leading the way, may have actually been putting, thoughts into the minds of some of these individuals who are now charged with plotting to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, that they were actually sort of spearheading this effort. And so the attorneys for some of these guys have raised entrapment, basically saying we wouldn't have done any of this stuff if the FBI agents hadn't pushed us to do this sort of thing. I'll be very curious to see what happens if and when this case goes to trial. I would not be surprised to see some really, really sweetheart plea deals offered these defendants so that prosecutors can hopefully avoid a trial. Because I think that if this does end up going before a jury, there's a better than zero chance that this ends in a mistrial or possibly even an acquittal. I think a mistrial is a more likely possibility, but I think, if this goes to trial, I think that it's got to come out that the government did some stuff that wasn't exactly kosher, wasn't on the up and up. And that's going to be, problematic, I think, for federal prosecutors.
And wouldn't it be fun to see Michigan state troopers arresting FBI agents?
You may get a chance to see that.
You can't make this stuff up, but that's what's happening in Joe Biden's America. When legitimate state authorities actually start to carry out their mandates as people who basically uphold the law. So anyway, well, listen, Cam Edwards, thanks so much for being on the Bill McIntosh with Freedom First. And anything else you want to say? Tell us about what you've been up to regarding bearingarms.com. Any other projects you're on that you can give us a peek into?
Yeah, you bet. Folks can check out Bearing Arms Cam and Company. That's the show I do each and every, Monday through Thursday, where we take a look at Second Amendment news and issues. You can find that on rumble.com. Just look up Cam and Company, or on YouTube, look up Town Hall Media. We are getting ready here in a few weeks. The Supreme Court gets back in session. They're going to be considering about a half dozen Second Amendment cases in conference. So there's a really good chance that we're going to hear the Supreme Court accept one or more Second Amendment cases. They're already going to be hearing a case dealing with New York's carry laws coming up in November. So, as we're getting into the fall, we're keeping our eyes on the courts. There's a lot of legal stuff going on, and we're covering it all for each and every day at bearingarms.com.
Well, listen, let me tell you something. SecondAmendmentFoundation.org is an organization that spends bundles of money, barrels of money on litigation. So $5 a month isn't asking too much to help the Second Amendment Foundation to protect your constitutional right to carry and defend your family. Thanks, Cam. Much obliged. Thanks for being on the show.
You bet. Thanks, Bill. Anytime.